to making the world a better place. And we do that through our mission here at Hosteling International, which is to help all to gain a greater understanding of the world and its peoples through hosteling. And we are all about building a more tolerant world and helping to build global citizens, because we are a peace-building organization, which is part of why we are here honoring this event today, among many other things. So Russ and I have been working together for about 15 years now when I joined the organization, and it's always one of my greatest moments when we get together as a national organization to share all the learning and leadership and wonderful things that happen at our national gatherings. And Russ has always been a really incredible man, super supportive. He's got the big vision in his head, and we need leaders, more leaders like Russ. So, Russ, come on up.
And we need more leaders like Michele. So, I am the president and CEO of Hosteling International USA. And my purpose today is to kind of explain how the threads of the environment, peace, and travel come together for HIUSA. And it comes together through dedicated people like Michele, hostels like this, multiplied in the case of hostels, we have 52 hostels across the United States. We have more than 3,000 volunteers that deliver programs to over 110,000 people. So hopefully we're making our own impact. The thing that excited me today was what I saw actually yesterday with the climate strike and the power of individuals coming together to affect change. So I feel like I'm in the right place today, and let me just give you a little bit of background. So International Day of Peace, established in 1981. And the sort of original context for that was that the UN wanted an opportunity, a day, to celebrate the ideal of peace in the context of war and violence. So there was a particular context for the International Peace Day when it was first established. In 1996, though, there was a twist on the theme. If you look at the logo for the International Day of Peace now, you'll see doves on the logo. And that was the introduction of reconciliation, the idea of coming together and reestablishing connections, peaceful connections with each other. And then in 2013, the Secretary General introduced the idea that the International Day of Peace ought to have a education component. Peace education component. HIUSA affiliated with the UN on this event in 2014. And it was all about this idea that peace ought to come before all individual differences among people. And the event that prompted this was the Boston Marathon bombings. You'll remember in 2013, we had in Boston the marathon bombings. HIUSA has a hostel in Boston. We were hosting many of the runners, about 300 runners being hosted at the hostel. And so that event really hit home. It hit home in terms of the runners. It hit home in terms of the neighborhood and their feeling of vulnerability, and our staff that wanted to do something to bring together and mend the sort of cultural divides that led to that particular bombing. So in 2014, we introduced what has become the HIUSA celebration of the International Day of Peace, all about recognizing the value of different cultures and recognizing the value of unity and strength that comes together when you collectively approach a common problem. So let's talk a little bit about the environment. How does the environment fit in to an organization like HIUSA? Actually, it's part of our DNA. When the organization was first founded, we were all about traveling under your own steam and leaving a place better than you found it. And for the first 30 to 40 years of our existence, you needed to actually to come to a hostel, either walking or cycling, in order to be admitted to the hostel. Only over the last 20 to 30 years has that rule been waived. So that's morphed into an organization that believes we do have a climate change issue, that we each have a responsibility to manage our carbon footprint, and we believe that environmental certifications, meaning in our case the Green Globe certification, is a measure of tangible action for organizations, and it's what we build our commitment on. What about the Portland Hostel? The Portland Hostel for High USA is a special one. It was founded by volunteers. Do we have volunteers here from the Portland Hostel? We have several. It was founded in the early 1980s by volunteers who wanted to bring a beacon of friendship, a place of intercultural understanding to Portland. And they have left their imprint on this hostel as it exists today. One of the first buildings in Portland that has a green roof that harvests rainwater for use in the toilets in the hostel. So a real tangible commitment to what we stand for as an organization and how the hostel contributes. We've also been blessed to have some amazing hostel staff. Talbot Wallace is not here today, but Michele is. I'll say a little bit more about Michele later. Are there any other staff here, Michele, in the room?
Steve was here, but I think he might be.
Oh, there we go.
Well, there we
Steve.
are. Yes.
Hey, Steve. So to wrap it up, in High USA, you have an organization that believes in the transformation power of travel. We also believe in the deep commitment and maintaining a deep commitment to the world in which we live, and climate is part of that commitment. And with that introduction, I will now turn it over to Kelsey, who will take it from here.
I realized that before I introduced Russ, I forgot to thank all of the wonderful partners that we work with to deliver this event. So I just really wanted to quickly give a shout out to the Greater Portland Sustainability Education Network. Here we have the United Nations Association of Portland. Here we have the War and Peace Initiative with the Schuetz Family Foundation. Back over here, we have Rotarian Action for Peace up at the corner there. We have the Citizens Climate Lobby over here. We have Physicians for Social Responsibility in the room, and we have Portland Community College as well. Portland State University Research, and Rachel, our singer-songwriter. And there's people all over actually the United States that came together to help make this happen. From our peace polls to you name it. We had the tribal nations of the Confederate tribes of Grand Ronde also involved. So this has been truly an amazing community event to pull together. So again, just wanted to recognize and thank everybody's participation. So I'm gonna pass it over to Kelsey, and she's gonna introduce herself, but I just wanted to say that in the short few months that I've been working with Kelsey, I've really enjoyed that process. She's a very calm and dedicated individual who brings a very grounding presence. So I'm thrilled to have her be our moderator today. So thank you, Kelsey. Come on up.
Well, what a lovely introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelsey Coolidge, and I'm a program manager with the War Prevention Initiative. We're a project of the Schuetz Family Foundation. And our mission is to inform and educate about alternatives to war and violence. And that mission is what brings us here today to discuss this year's theme for World Peace Day, which is Climate Action for Peace. And I'm joined with a bunch of other fabulous panelists who I'll ask to join me on this stage right now. That we have with us today. First, my colleague, Patrick Hiller, the Executive Director of the War Prevention Initiative. Sitting next to him, applause is nice, thank you. Sitting next to him is Jason Jurjevich, Assistant Director of the Population Research Center, a research institute in the College of Urban and Political Affairs at Portland State University. Next to Jason, we have Deidre. She's a volunteer with the Citizens Climate Lobby and will share with us her story on her current healthcare solution to this day's theme. Next to her, we have Maxine Fookson from the Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. And last but certainly not least, we have Neeraja Havaligi, the Executive Director of the Greater Portland Sustainability Education Network. After our panelists share some personal remarks with us, I'll open it up for a Q&A with you all. You're welcome to share your questions, comments, thoughts, inspirations that you have after hearing the panel and meeting such amazing Portland-based nonprofit organizations. So with that, I'll have Patrick start us off.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming out. Well, I just want to make sure that we all start from the same point here. We have a climate crisis. The issues of war and peace and justice are concerning. Sometimes they can make you very angry, and sometimes they can make you want to stick your head in the sand because they're too overwhelming, too much to deal with. While that is understandable, that won't solve anything. So today I'm going to actually tell you that we are at a stage in human history where we can say with confidence that we know better and more effective alternatives to war and violence. So over the last more than 100 years now, there have been numerous global developments, historical developments, that we can consider to be a global peace system. That means there were numerous major trends in 3 areas: global collaboration, conflict transformation, and social change. So humans have learned how to collaborate on a global level in institutions and in organizations. Humans have many ways now how to address their conflicts constructively, and societies have undergone major social changes that at the time when they happened were considered unthinkable. So just think about global collaboration. We obviously have a heavy United Nations framework right here. So let's take the Sustainable Development Goals within that framework. 17 goals. One is climate action, another one is peace. So it's easy to dismiss the United Nations and say, well, they're not effective, there are all those impediments for them. There are structural problems like the Security Council, but at the same time, in my opinion, in my view, the United Nations right now is the strongest political body that can actually use the concept of nation states working together on a global level to solve the world's greatest problems. So while I am one of those who would like to see United Nations reform, I also still think we really need to put the United Nations front and center when we talk about climate action for peace. Or look, for example, at the other major area, social change. We shouldn't underestimate the power of social movements that they've had in impacting our world. The environmental movement has been confronting and challenging militarism for a long time. Climate action for peace has been part of their narrative for almost 50 years when Greenpeace was founded. There's something in the name, right? Greenpeace, about connecting the dots there. And today we have a very vibrant, energetic, diverse, young environmental movement that can lead the way. Just think about what happened yesterday. I live in Hood River, and I was there with my son, who's 6-year-old, and my wife, and it was really great to see that new environmental movement. Or the last area, that of constructive conflict transformation. I just call part of it peace science. So there's a field called peace science. That is my background. So in peace science, we study the causes of war and the conditions for peace. And we think we've figured it out. I mean, as scientists, we still need to learn and grow. But for example, when we talk about the environmental movement that I mentioned, we know how movements work, what makes them succeed, what are the conditions they need to create to achieve their goals. We also know, for example, that nations are 100 times more likely to intervene in a civil war when there's oil. And we also know that the public is less likely to support wars if the alternatives are known. So these are really important findings out of our field, and we try to use those, so that is part of what Kelsey and I do at our organization. We try to make those meaningful for people who can work with that. Media, educators, activists, elected officials. So that's what we do there. And also on climate and conflict and peace, that is front and center in our field in peace and conflict studies. So how do we tie all that together? Well, if we look at global collaboration, conflict transformation, social change, we have an opportunity to really break through that dominant war system. We can look at creating a new narrative, one that goes beyond, and don't get me wrong, I like symbols, but it goes beyond doves and peace signs and everything that makes us feel good about peace. It goes to offering concrete examples based on real-world trends that we have that alternative story in the making. So we can communicate differently to different audiences and be heard more. We also have an opportunity in that peace systems perspective to build alliances that we didn't know we could build. If we look at the different topics, how they're connected. If we look at our war economy, militarism, we connect it to climate change, to refugee issues, to indigenous rights, women's rights, all of those different rights movements, workers' rights. So we can build alliances that are then more diverse, and in being more diverse, they can be more effective. So let me just look at my cheat sheet. I guess, my final reflection is that this global peace system gives me renewed hope, so I'm not angry or disillusioned by what is happening now. I think we can use and build on those trends because there's something that has already happened that is good. The United Nations is a good thing. Let's build on that. We have opportunities for education, networking, and action. And we can build alliances along the lines that you've never considered before. And I end with that example. If the Koch Foundation, I'm talking the Koch brothers, and George Soros can join forces to confront US foreign policy, militaristic foreign policy, then those of us who care about the planet and the people can do much more than they. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Jurjevich, Director of the Population Research Center. I'm also a faculty member in Urban Studies and Planning at Portland State University. I'm coming at this from a little bit different perspective. My formal training is as a population geographer, and so I focus a lot on population and demographic trends in the Portland metro region, as well as across the state of Oregon. One of the biggest ways, one of the most immediate impacts that, with respect to population change, particularly in Oregon and across the US, it's almost produces an instantaneous difference with respect to socio-political, cultural changes for particular communities through migration. And for many of you who live and work in the Portland metro region, you know that this region has been really successful at attracting and retaining people who are moving to Portland. In fact, if you think about the statistics on this, we are roughly 310 people move to the Portland metro region each day. Roughly 230 people leave each day, which means in the region, we net about 80 individuals per day. And that is largely through voluntary migration. These are people who are making voluntary decisions to move to the region, to stay in the region, or to leave this region. So thinking about some of the growth challenges with that population growth, and particularly some of the other work that my colleagues have done at Portland State, looking at displacement and gentrification patterns, particularly among individuals of color, that got me thinking about how to think about this issue with respect to climate change-driven migration, really centered around social justice and equity. So that's one of the things I think is an important framing. The other is that our office at Portland State is responsible for producing an unenviable task, but an important one, which is producing 50-year population forecasts for all cities and counties in the state of Oregon for land use planning, transportation purposes. As we do that work across the state, we were in Southern Oregon about 2 years ago, and we got the question from people in the audience who said, do your forecasts include climate migrants? And this question kept coming up. And it was based on the fact that a lot of folks in the Medford, Grants Pass area in Southern Oregon were saying, anecdotally, they were seeing people who were moving from California due to responses from increasing rates of wildfire, increasing rates of smog and smoke associated with the fire. Of course, we've had those challenges here in Oregon, particularly over the past 2 to 3 years. But the short answer was no. The forecast didn't include climate-based migration, and that was something that we wanted to really tackle at the Population Research Center. So what I'm going to leave you with today, and I don't have copies of this, but I'll make sure that I can send this report out, is I'm going to be talking about a symposium that we held at the university a little over 2 years ago. And I want to just sort of provide you some highlights from this symposium as what I believe is important context for thinking about this issue here locally. The question that we phrased at the symposium was this: do we need to be planning for more population growth in Oregon and Washington because of climate change? And if so, what would a systematic framework look like for developing and updating migration scenarios that include climate change driven migration? And there was a couple of sort of goals of the symposium. I'm going to skip through that, but I just want to talk with you a little bit about sort of the takeaways from the event and sort of really what I really think is important context for thinking about this issue. Our research in the U.S., and admittedly this gets a little bit dorky and scholarly, but our research in the U.S. is largely it's a voluntary-based system, right? Most of our movement in the U.S. is people who choose to pick up and move from one metro to the other. Of course, there are people who are displaced, and there are involuntary moves, certainly. But our knowledge of migration is also due to sudden weather event-related movement. So thinking about hurricanes and Katrina, flooding. But there's nothing really, we have less data and less information about climate change-related migration. And so that's really a gap in the literature with respect to social science for us to be able to understand that. And climate change has the potential to really upend that entire paradigm, that research paradigm, for us to think about this issue. The other is there are data limitations. Remember, in this region, when we talk about the livability of Portland and we talk about the intentionality of planning and how we've made the region the way it is, one of the ways we've done that is we've used data for data-driven decision making. Unfortunately, this is a challenge that we do not have good data on. So that's one of the challenges of coming at this. The other thing I wanted to mention was when we think about the decision or the involuntary decision to move, there's been a scholar who at Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada who's written a lot about this, Dr. Robert McClellan, who likes to talks about the importance of thinking about migration as MESA or MESA. And he says the propensity for somebody to pick up and move or involuntarily move is determined by 3 factors: environmental risk, as in E, the sensitivity to the environment and the environmental factors, and the ability for individuals or not to adapt to the situation. And that's a large determination as to how people make that decision to move. He also has a couple other elements that I think are really important for us to consider when we're thinking about climate change and population movement. Most migration tends to be intra-national, meaning movement within a country. If there is movement across borders, he says it tends to be to neighboring countries. Many of the migrants who move tend to be working age migrants. Why? Because people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s tend to be the most mobile out of any point in their life course. He also talks about the fact that many of the movements follow existing networks of migration, and much of that migration and immigration tends to be a rural to urban flow. So I'm a little bit short on time, but at the symposium, we had a couple of conclusions. I'll leave you with 3 of them. One of them was, should we index our migration forecasts at the Population Research Center and Metro and other agencies that produce them for a climate migration factor? And the answer is, at this point, is no. We need more data, we need more research, and at the symposium, we identified a set of short-term and long-term research objectives that we are going to be working through as social scientists, along with the climate scientists, to tackle this really thorny and stubborn challenge for all of us as we move forward. So I'll end it with that, so thank you.
Hi, my name is Deidre Schuetz, and I wanted to share a little about my journey with my background in healthcare and international studies. So our current problem, according to the UN Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, in 2018 stated that we need to decrease our net carbon emissions globally by about 45% by 2030 and be net zero by 2050. And the Paris Climate Agreement at this point falls short of those goals. So I've been working diligently in the last decade, particularly this last year, volunteering for various initiatives and trying to figure out how to elevate my personal impact for climate solutions. And with my background in international studies and healthcare, this is what I came up with. So what I've learned about the healthcare system and climate is there's not a lot of people, a lot of organizations working in this space, except for Maxine's organization I found has been working in this space quite well. But there is an extreme lack considering the opportunity that exists. So I learned that if the US healthcare system were a country, it would be the 5th largest economy and the 7th largest carbon polluter. So there's a huge opportunity financially to dip into this space. It's also a huge challenge. So the additional healthcare contexts include that the US healthcare system is by far the most expensive in the world. It's about twice as much as the second most expensive. Healthcare research estimates that climate change will have very costly impacts, so the time to change is now. And the good news is that there's a trend in climate-aligned healthcare solutions in the form of nature and food-based prescriptions by physicians to encourage people to get in contact with nature and look at their nutrition. So some of these include food RX, veggie RX, and nature, park RX. I can get into the details of those if people would like to learn more. Many more opportunities exist in this space to create alternative prescriptions to work on the preventative side of medicine to save on the healthcare costs. Because 75% of healthcare costs are caused by preventable chronic illnesses. So I'm coming up with this solution called Nutrition Garden RX, or Nutrition Garden Prescriptions. The idea is to optimize small space gardens for climate and health benefits to serve low-income, non-land owning populations. So the idea is to minimize carbon footprint, maximize carbon drawdown, and increase plant-based food nutrition. So the key to this climate solution is a community-based design process. What I'm proposing in this first pilot is to work with immigrant and refugee women, particularly women who have a background in crafting traditional food, medicine, and or farming. Nutrition professionals would be another group I'd like to work with, and climate professionals, and that can include indigenous populations. So the reason why I want to focus on immigrants and refugee women in particular, they will design solutions that will work for them and their families, and perhaps new solutions for our more dominant cultures at this point in the United States. Being an immigrant and refugee is a social determinant of health vulnerability, and especially if that person has been displaced by force or conflict, has limited education and linguistic skills, or originates from areas of poverty. So I like to target women because they're the most critical target group to improve household nutrition. Their health and nutrition status determines many health outcomes for themselves and their families. They also have proven in international development as having the highest return on investment in development. So the vision, during his first pilot is to learn, develop, and implement and scale these nutrition garden models. Short term, we'd like to create a grassroots scaling effort between similar cultural groups. Additional community-based design processes with other more diverse, or I should say, differing cultural groups would also be good down the line, but we want to get our process down first with just one population. Initially, we'll be focusing on Latinx women. Long term, we hope that food security intervention for climate migrants there could be an effort for food security intervention for climate migrants. So making modular gardens that could maybe the Red Cross could use for catastrophes, maybe Mercy Corps, something like that. Another long-term vision would be to get scientists, medical researchers involved in creating prescriptions more specific to certain medical conditions, like perhaps diabetes or cancer, or other nutrition deficiencies. So, in summary, I'd like Nutrition Garden RX. This is the solution I've been investing in as a multidisciplinary solution in healthcare. I would also encourage you all to look at your strengths and your background and your sectors to see how you could plug into climate solutions. I also encourage you to reach across sectors to people different from you, whether it's a sector, a discipline, maybe a cultural group,